Hey, that is the best intro.
I worked really hard on it.
It shows. That's real cool.
Welcome, everybody, to Books by Adrian, Livestream Sunday. Welcome, Barrett Laurie.
Hi.
Barrett, for anyone, before we get into all the housekeeping stuff, anyone who might not know who you are, give us the rundown on yourself, your channel, what you do.
Yeah, for sure. My name is Barrett Laurie. I have a channel here on YouTube. Search my name, Barrett Laurie, you'll find me. Basically, I'm a writer seeking to sell to a traditional publisher a series that is focused around an LGBT character. Adrian and I have talked about inclusion before, but I talk about it a lot on my channel, in the books I read, and things that different things I'll give to writers. So check me out on my YouTube channel, and I will give you all the talk about books, butt stuff, and fun stuff.
I love that you call it butt stuff.
I mean,
cracks me up every time.
What are you gonna do? It's Crohn's.
Like, it's the first time I heard it. Every time I'm like, I forget it's coming. You say it. Cracks me up. Everybody, I'm very excited for today's show. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be very educational and enlightening, and I'm very excited. I wanted to make sure everybody went ahead and did the whole like, comment, subscribe dealy, and I wanted to take a quick opportunity to officially announce the contest for the channel, and anybody subscribed to my newsletter has already gotten all the details in the newsletter. Everything happens there first, and now it's your turn. So let's check it out. So,
yeah,
the Flash Fiction contest on Books by Adrian. The idea is this. Actually, I have what I can show right here. Nope, this way. Here we go. So, it's a Flash Fiction musical score contest. And the idea is that you submit a story, 800 words or less, any genre, any theme, any topic, whatever. I'm looking for the most emotional story for the winner. And the reason being that the grand prize is that a musician is going to score the audiobook version of that story. We'll have a whole video at the end when it's all done on the channel with the story being read out and the musical score company. And we're going to watch this fine gentleman score the project live on a live stream Sunday in May. So the deadline for entries is April 15th to give him about a 2-week head start, checking things out. And then we go live in May with the winner. When you go to the website, booksbyadrian.com, you'll find this on the very main page. It has a submit your entry button right there. It'll generate the email for you with the correct subject line and everything, and all you have to do is attach your story to it and send. So get it in by April 15th, 800 words or less, more than 800 words, and you're out.
So wait, I didn't realize you're going to show him scoring it. Like, that's so cool.
Yeah, we're going to do a live stream Sunday, and he's going to essentially teach us about storytelling through music.
Wow. Okay.
That'll be the topic of that day. And then after that live stream, he'll finish it up. He'll send me the file. And then I'll probably do like some animations and stuff for it too. So it'll be a whole video.
That's cool.
Yeah. Should be a lot of fun.
Sweet.
Should entice a lot of people, I hope, to write some flash fiction pieces. And the sky's the limit. Write whatever you want.
I say do it. I'll tell the people in our little AuthorTube nerd group, I'm editing a couple for Kent Sean's. I'm happy to help people edit if they want for this one as well.
Right on. I like it.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Barrett Laurie.
Yes.
We're talking about LGBTQ representation in fiction today. And I wanted to open up by sharing that where this comes from for me. So when I was much younger, I remember reading the Sandman graphic novels.
Yeah.
And falling in love with Neil Gaiman's writing through those graphic novels, and then seeking him out more and finding his novels. And I ended up reading, first and foremost, American Gods.
Yep. Which
to this day might be my all-time favorite novel.
Is it really? I
think so. I keep going back to it. You know, my favorites list changes a lot, but that one's always up. It's always on it. So I think that might be it. And, you know, part of the experience of reading that book for the first time, I don't know if you've ever read it.
I have read it. So yeah,
so part of the experience is that little interlude after the first chapter where the goddess of love, who you don't know is the goddess of love yet, devours a man through her vagina.
Right.
And you know, first time reader, I'm a teen. I've never read anything like that before. And it blew my hair back. And I had to keep reading, obviously. Eventually I got to the chapter with the taxi driver Jeannie and this beautiful gay love story in this one chapter. And I remember feeling like I was, and I had the same feeling when I saw it again on the show, but I had this feeling of being allowed to see something so private that I felt like I shouldn't be there.
Wow.
You know what I mean? Like I'm reading the thing and I'm like, should I be witnessing this? Like, this is this is between them. Like
that's really good work, right? I mean, amazing work. And you know, you find out that, as far as I know, Mr. Neil Gaiman is a straight man. Yeah,
so that intrigued me, that he was able to put himself so clearly in the mind of a gay man and write a very beautiful love story about gay men.
Yep. And
not have it feel contrived or forced or anything like that. It felt like everything else in that book, like it belonged right there. And yet he sort of glosses over the actual sex scene. It's like a sentence, maybe two, and he moves past it. And that then intrigued me, because then I'm like, well, if we're gonna go in, like, let's go in.
Right. Who are they?
What's this slight pullback here?
Yeah.
And then, you know, I'm reading, for example, A Song of Ice and Fire. Ooh. And there's a gigantic cast and a diverse one at that. And there are gay characters in the story. Yeah. But as far as we know, none of the point of view characters are gay characters. Right. So again, why the slight pullback there? You have a gigantic cast. Yeah. You know? And so when I sat down to write my story, I was like, I'm going to write what I know. Like, half of my friends are gay people.
That'll help.
How am I going to write a story without any point of view gay characters? I can't. It would be disingenuous to the world that I'm writing and the world that I'm observing to inspire my writing. And so that's where I'm coming from with today's live stream. I want to be like you said in before the show. We are sorry, my kids just ran in.
Oh, that's okay.
He's running from my wife. Felix, you being naughty?
That's a happy laugh.
Bye, Felix. I love you. So yes, so that's where I'm coming from. I am wanting to be as transparent as possible in my ignorant strictness.
Sure.
And educate myself as much as possible so that my characters will be, full of life and real and believable, and ultimately to do my part in representation in general. So I brought you on to talk about that. I know that you have a lot of history planned out to talk about. So why don't you kick things off?
I'm just going to start going off of what you just said, and kind of, because I think a lot of writers have that feeling of like, ooh, I don't know if I know enough about that to write about that.
Exactly.
And especially in the own voices era that we're in right now, where there's definitely a push for original stories centering around protagonists that identify with the author directly. Okay, what you said, first of all, I love everything you said, because anybody who would ask me, should I have a gay character in my book? My response is always, I don't know, do you have any gay characters in your life?
Yeah.
And if the answer is no, or you really don't have anybody that you see regularly in your orbit of people, your tribe, what have you, if someone isn't gay or lesbian or bisexual or transgender that you know specifically, it's not going to be as authentic on the page as I think people often think it will be.
Right.
I'll just add a gay character.
Or how they intend it to be.
Exactly. In fact, it can usually harm, or sometimes do more harm than good. Some examples of that just in past literature, at least where harm can happen. A lot of times, some of the tropes we're going to talk about at the end, but one of the ones that definitely needs to end is the trope of a transgender woman tricking another woman. So a man dressed up as a woman is how it's usually sold in the trope. To attack a woman. So think Silence of the Lambs, Buffalo Bill. In film, you can think of Psycho, that and in a bathroom, no less. So those kinds of tropes have been used to the detriment of transgender women with bathroom bills and different things that are politicized that truly are born out of tropes made in fiction and in film, right? So what I love that you said there was, I want to be inclusive and I want to write characters that are true and authentic to the world I live in. And then the only other piece to that I tell you is I'll be one of the gays that will happily sensitivity read for you, right? It's then in your life that you hand it to and say, hey, read this. Are any of my stereotypes off? Or does any of this read as more harmful than helpful? And you'll 9 times out of 10 get a solid piece of advice from an LGBT person who's happy and willing to do that for you, right? And so I would say to anybody, think through who in your life can you lean on and say, would you read this, see if it's helpful or harmful, be a sensitivity reader. And if you don't have anybody in your life, there's places you can go. For instance, a local LGBT center is a good place to go for younger readers. Now you're going to need to go through whoever the mentors are for their program first to read your piece before they're going to pass it along to kids. But that's a place to go to find younger readers who are more susceptible to tropes being harmful than adults. And again, a place you can go for free readers who might read your stuff and give you feedback. So I would say, write what you know, surround yourself. If you live in a diverse world, write that diverse world, right? That's your reality. So it's less likely to be harmful. And if it's not, tread lightly and lean on sensitivity readers. So I'd start there. The other thing I'd give for a little bit of background, the type of stories I write are for kids. So YA and middle grade. And part of that comes out of the discussion we're having today, which is I became a reader. I'm a millennial born in 1982. So I don't know how old people are out there.
84.
Okay, so we're around the same age. Well, my little chubby, nerdy self became a reader during the Book It era, which is when we could go to school and read books in our area, and we got free pizzas, personal pan pizzas for the number of books we read. Well, that was like giving a crack addict drugs for
Yeah.
crying out loud. I was like, oh, wait, I get to sit home and read, and then you're going to take me for pizza? Awesome.
Done.
So the reading for me became a means of escape. And it was that from a young age. So, you know, probably 7 or 8 is when I read the book that changed my life and trajectory into that of a writer and a reader. For me, that was Roald Dahl. And the book was Matilda. Once we get past that point, I become, great story. But once I become a teen, there was a real, which for me, to put it in years, was about 93, 94. There was what I call a literary desert for YA books for LGBT teens. So I basically was a reader who just consumed everything I could. And for me, if that was LGBT, most of the time it was adult, and most of the time it was really inappropriate for me, age-wise. We'll talk about that as we go through the timeline of that. But so that people kind of understand where I'm coming from, part of the reason I want to write to kids is I think I'm fulfilling the gap that I had in my reading journey as a reader, and basically creating what wasn't there for me when I was that age. What's great is that's changed a lot. So we'll go over that when we go through the timeline, but that's where it comes from for me. So,
and that's the beautiful adage for authors. If you want to read a book and it doesn't exist, you have to write that book.
Create it. That's your space. I mean, that's your niche, right? That's where you go. So I think, you know, and that doesn't mean that every book I pick up has to have a gay character in it. In fact, most of them don't. And I like it that way because I want to read stories that aren't just like mine. I want to see worlds that look different than mine. But the last thing I'll say, the reason inclusion is important, and this is a discussion that's been happening for, I don't know, probably 7, 8 years in traditional publishing. But especially now during the Own Voices era, what's so important about that is, especially in the YA middle grade space, kids that grow up in areas like where I grew up in rural Missouri need to have access to literature that tells them that they are okay the way they are. And it doesn't have to be everything they read, but they've got to have a place they can go where who they are is validated, is normalized, and is seen as something that is not othered, which is what they probably experience in their own homes.
Yeah.
So that's why the importance is made for YA and middle grade stories to be really inclusive for race, for sexual orientation, for gender identity, all kinds of things, so that no matter who that kid is, they can see themselves in at least a few stories, because the vast majority of stories are for everybody else, right?
Yeah, and you make such a good point there that I feel so few people talk about, which is that when a young person is finding themselves understanding who they are and they happen to be LGBTQ+, it makes them an outsider in their own home. Right. Unless they happen to be the children of a lesbian couple. Like, yeah,
true.
Otherwise, they're going to be outsiders in their own home,
true,
let alone society. Like, it starts at home.
Yeah.
And that's got to be so hard. So.
Yeah. Well, and even if your parent, like, for instance, I grew up in a very, a home that was very supportive of me from a young age. And the moment I was out, my mother she is a click from a gay man herself. So, you know, I could not have been born into a better family for who and what I am and became.
Yeah.
But for instance, when I was at the LGBT center, that was not the case for most of the kids that were in our youth program. Mm-hmm. And, you know, the suicide rates among those kids in that age range of 12 to 17, even today in 2020, 2021, would boggle your mind. Because the numbers are undeniable. They're twice that of kids that identify as heterosexual or heteronormative. And, you know, to me, that's a data thing. I'm a data person. So there's just no denying that there is a problem there that we're not addressing. And so, yes, if they can find that escape in a story, great. You know, I want that escape to be there. Because as we'll talk about in a minute, when I was a teen, I went to Borders. I still have the book. But there was a border that I went to. I found a gay worker there because this was like 1998. I was 16. And I asked him for a book that was a fiction novel about gay men. And he gave me this. But he didn't give me this. He took me to the LBGT counter and gave me this. This is very much an adult novel, by the way. So not at all appropriate for a 16-year-old, and gave me a very skewed view of what life was going to look like for me. So that is just a real life example of like why it's important for there to be lots of different choices for especially young readers who might be questioning or identify as LGBTQ. We need to be able to point them to things that are age appropriate and can teach them good boundaries for what to expect in the world they are going to exist in as adults.
For sure.
So sorry about that. That was the long explanation of why I think it matters.
Not at all, brother. This is why you're here.
Now that you know that about me, let's follow my reading trajectory. Let's start at the beginning, the way backs. I think Adrian has a title screen.
Let's start.
Okay, so the 1990s is the first bit of fiction, especially that had characters that are younger. The credit for that is given to Mercedes Lackey. And if anyone out there doesn't know who Mercedes Lackey is, these are the 3 books that she wrote starting 89, 91, and 93 that had a gay protagonist and his lover as the main relationships throughout the series, which was not a thing in 1989. So we'll get to why I think that got passed. But Mercedes Lackey is a genre fiction author in high fantasy. She has written about 140 books. She writes about 5 a year, and those are all traditionally published. So a prolific writer.
To say the least.
Right? I mean, it's something else. Most of her novels take place in a country called Valdemar, and it's a world that is very much like our own, except for the magical creatures within it, elves, vampires, fairies, that sort of thing. So Magic's Pawn, which is this book, came out in 1989. And it is, for lack of a better word, a new adult would be what we would call it now, even though the main character is 16. Some of the sexual references are a little more adult than for a younger reader. However, the main character is a 16-year-old mage who is coming into his own, can't seem to satisfy his dad by being a warrior. Instead, he gets into fashion and the arts and music and surrounds himself with a bunch of lovely ladies who are gossiping one day about this very handsome guy named Tylendal, and that he is a Sheachern, which is never defined as homosexual in any of the books, in any of the series. But when you read her definition for what it is, it's essentially the word for gay in her world. And I am almost positive, although I have tried to find every interview on her that I can, that the reason that got past her publisher at the time was that change, was that it wasn't called homosexual, especially since they were kids. So I have seen a few of her interviews where she talked about how some of her books were burned at different areas of the country when it was discovered that these books had gay kids in them. So yeah, so I know there was some some pushback for her because again, this was the 90s, and so anyway, that was the OG, if you will, of the YA, more new adult genre fiction. And something that I think you'll see, other than Armistead Maupin, who is writing during this era, but he starts his series Tales in the City in 1978. And those books were published all the way through 2014. I think there are 9 total of his books. But beyond his stories, there isn't a whole lot of LGBTQ representation at all in protagonist characters. It just doesn't exist.
Yeah, POV characters. Yeah, no.
Not at all. Not at all. And definitely there's going to be some people who, if this was like widely viewed with some bookish people, would want to hop down in the comments and argue with me about who in like literary fiction of years yore were actually gay. I can't have that argument with you. Yes, there are plenty of those, I'm sure. However, as far as like explicitly being gay, there aren't any. But Mercedes Lackey kind of broke down that door, and she did 6 total books from 89 to 96, all in that series that were specifically centered around gay characters. There were a couple other really important works that came out of this same time, and I'm just going to name a couple of them so people can kind of recognize the names. But one of the big ones in 1990 was called A Home at the End of the World. It was done as a film with Colin Farrell later in the 2000s.
I was going to say the title sounds very familiar.
Yeah, the story, and again, this was one that, again, I bought at that Borders as a very young, way too young to have read this story, young man. But it's a love triangle that ends in a polyamorous relationship between 2 men and a woman. And they raise a family.
What was the name again?
It's called A Home at the End of the World. It's written by Michael Cunningham. And it published in 1990. It was beyond controversial at the time. But again, it gives a really clear and non-judgmental view of a polyamorous bisexual relationship in the early 1990s. So the reason I bring that one up is we haven't quite fixed the bisexual trope problems in literature even now, where we don't do the, oh, if they're bisexual, they're just slutty, or, you know, something along those lines of a way we write bisexual characters, or maybe they're not really bisexual, they're really gay, they're just afraid to say it. Like, all of those sorts of tropes are still problematic today. A Home at the End of the World does a great job of that's never even an issue. Like, if anyone's looking for how to do bisexual right, you know, granted polyamorous is in there too, this is one I would point them to and say,
that's perfect for me, man. That's exactly what I'm writing. I'm trying to, again, subvert that trope of the love triangle,
right, by
going the polyamorous route.
Well, that is a book I think you should check out. It's a great book. The film is really good too, and very close to what the book was. So
right on.
You can get it both ways. Another one that is on my bookshelf that I picked up as a way too young teen came out in '92, and it's called Fag Hag. This plays into another popular gay trope. Let's see, the gay best friend. So this is all about a woman in Chicago who is obsessed with her gay best friend and his love life, so much so that she doesn't live her own. So Fag Hag by Robert Rohde. Again, really controversial, made it on the New York Times bestseller list, and I know there was a lot of backlash. Most of these authors have large gaps between their first books and their next books. A lot of that, I think, had to do with writing a gay character and having some pushback on that for a number of years before they were able to sell again.
Interesting.
Can't really prove that, but when you see authors that have published 6 or 7 books, but there's 6 to 8 years between their first and their second, and then their second book doesn't have a gay character as a protagonist, you just kind of, I don't know, that's me.
Makes sense.
A really important book for any person of color is Invisible Life by Elin Harris. This one was published in '91 and then republished in 1994. And it's just the story of a Black man's journey with coming to terms with his sexuality and being gay. And again, it gives a different perspective, but an unnecessarily own voice's view, because the culture is different in that book than, for instance, in A Home at the End of the World, right? So there are some racial differences that come across in the book and are important to the plot. So Invisible Life. All of the ones that I've mentioned, by the way, were Lambda Literary Award winners. Lambda Literary is an award given to books that are centered around LGBTQ protagonists or characters. And it was founded in 1988. And pretty much everything I'm going to tell you about today, all of the books on my list, are all pretty much Lambda Literary winners or nominees.
Okay.
Part of the old school behind that was, for us gays back in the early days of internet, back when it used to like whoosh, 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 connect and then AOL ding.
Yeah. You get a phone call and knocks you off the internet.
Yep. The Lambda Literary was how, as a young gay person, that's how I knew at the end of the year what I should read. Because the internet didn't necessarily have like BuzzFeed's list of the hottest LGBT books out. Like, that wasn't a thing. So that's how we knew what to like check out and read, was the Lambda Literary Awards. So that shows my age too. So those three are.
Kids say they don't know, man. They don't know what dial-up was.
Exactly. They don't even know what I had to deal with without a cell phone for years. I used to have to use actual maps.
Dude, I remember payphones.
Oh,
I used to have to use
and
pagers.
Pagers. Did you have a pager? My mom would let me have a pager.
I never had the pager. By the time I actually got into like having something, I had a cell phone. But
I wanted a pager so bad it wasn't even funny, and Deanne was having none of it. Okay, so the next few get into the trauma porn part. I'm just going to gloss over this and make it short. But these are essentially stories, even though they're written by gay writers, they really, the plot circles around some form of trauma. And it's almost impossible to read the story and not feel triggered if you experience any part of that trauma. So that would be like Boy Culture by Matthew Rettenmund and Invisible Life. Nailed it. And then Dream Boy by Jim Grizzly. Both of those, Jim Grizzly especially, Dream Boy is one that I would say it's really kind of a young adult book, or it was meant for. However, it's about a boy named Nathan who longs to escape his abusive father. He falls in love with Roy, his neighbor. They are discovered in the throes of a passionate moment, which is pretty PG. And another boy not only beats Nathan, but rapes him. So, and a lot of these stories have an element of rape to them during the 1990s around main characters. And so that's why I say the trauma porn, because
it also feels, every time I've encountered that same trope where the main character is, awakening to their homosexuality, there's usually a component of rape in their story, and it's almost like the writer's trying to justify the sexuality. Like, oh, this is why it happened. And it's like...
Yes. Well, and Dream Boy, the part of the reason Dream Boy is a problem, too, is the father molests him. And again, this is a gay writer that wrote this book. And I don't besmudge it, or, if you want to say anything.
Well, I mean, it does happen. Like we were saying earlier, if we're writing the world around us, let's be honest.
100%, which is, I guess, what I'm trying to say is the reason I call it the trauma porn era is you're going to be hard pressed to find a lot of books in the 90s era that don't revolve around a rape trope, an AIDS trope, for lesbian fiction especially, losing your family trope. If I go with the love of my life, I will lose, the children I have, et cetera, et cetera. So, that kind of is, but I think that is what was breaking through at the time. Like, to a literary agent and to an editor at a publisher, that felt, scary, I think. It felt edgy. It felt, what they should be putting out there. So where now I think we would view that through a very different lens, as just being, when that's really all the stories that are being told, then it starts to look to people like our lives are just HIV.
Yeah, a terrified nightmare, constantly.
Yeah, trauma after trauma. So that's now I do want to give a shout out to some of the authors who made big breakthroughs. I mentioned Michael Cunningham again, who I pointed you to with The Home at the End of the World. It was 1998 before his next breakthrough book happened, The Hours, which again,
how many years in between that?
8. 8. Now, what's interesting about The Hours is there is a lesbian element to that story. It was made into a film, I believe, Oscar-winning film, Nicole Kidman, Meryl Streep.
I was just going to say Nicole Kidman, yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Anyway, the story itself wasn't as gay or as out there as Home at the End of the World was. So that's an example of that long gap.
Yeah, and that pullback.
So same author, long time. Now, another author who is actually lauded for it that's also very famous is Anne Rice. Anne Rice doesn't really get her due. The Vampire Armand and The Tale of the Body Thief are both in the Vampire Chronicles series, and both of those have a gay protagonist. It's as the main character.
I haven't read those.
And now, since we're about to transition into the 2000s, what's interesting about Anne Rice, and I want people to pay attention to, is once we transition into the 2000s, her son has a giant rise in LGBT literature. So we're ready to transition.
Let's do it.
All right.
Now,
So
before you dive in,
yeah,
when you sent me your list,
yeah.
For that one, you wrote The Rise of Male Romance.
Yeah.
Who knew
Who knew?
straight women would like it?
Who knew?
I was like, I knew. Like,
legit, I'm telling you, it's a thing. I just had no idea.
It makes perfect sense to me because straight dudes tend to like lesbian porn.
Oh, maybe. Okay.
And so that's where my head went when you said it. I was like, well, that makes perfect sense. It's the other side of that coin.
I guess. It's so something happens in around 2000 and publishing does a giant leap forward. We start to see a lot of young adult titles, and by a lot, I mean still less than 100, but way more than the 1990s. Young adult titles and middle grade titles geared towards LGBT kids. But also in adult literature, things kind of pop off. So we were talking about Anne Rice. Her only son, Christopher Rice, is a gay author. I own every one of his books. The only one I don't have here is one I have lent out to a neighbor. But Christopher Rice's stories were all centered around an LGBT character, at least up until his fourth book. And what's interesting about his story, all contemporary fiction, new adult, so just past YA, a little older than that. But for instance, they're very dated. Blindfold, this is a book about don't ask, don't tell. So like this book today, like wouldn't land. But at the time,
you don't have that relatability.
Exactly. Anymore. At the time, they were stunning. So when he premiered, he wrestled with whether or not to use his name because he didn't want to be linked to her and didn't want to do vampire books. So anyway, he went out on his own, kept his name, and was picked up by Miramax Books. They also bought the film rights to all of his books, but sadly sat on them and never did anything with them. And of course, now, as I've said, a lot of them have aged out. But for any young reader, read Christopher Rice, The Snow Garden, or Density of Souls. Density of Souls is his debut. It's stunningly beautiful. It's set in New Orleans, which is where he grew up, and you can tell. And you're not ready for the incestual mind F that is the twist in that ending of that book. That happens literally on the last 8 pages. So I've read all of these so many times they're falling apart. So
it's so interesting that he would be writing something so ahead of its time almost at the time. And now, because of the progress
totally
of our culture, it's actually outdated.
That's right. And part of the reason I wanted to focus on Christopher Rice, because again, bookish people out there will jump down my throat. There was lots of people, David Levithian and different people, of course. Yes, there were. The reason Christopher Rice is important to me, he was the first person I was aware of as a young gay man that lots of gay men were aware of and talking about bookish people back then. And the thing about his were that we all loved was they were contemporary stories that were not fantasy. So I love fantasy. I write in fantasy. That's my game. That's my bag. But I love a good contemporary, especially thrillers and suspense stories. I love a good murder if I can solve it in 300 pages. So that's what we loved about him was it was like watching a television show or something and you could relate. And it was about stuff we talked about at the time, you know, the rise of meth and sex with gay men and P&P play. There is a whole, the Don't Ask, Don't Tell was obviously huge in our community for years. And this story was such a beautiful way of talking about how wrong that law was, that it made him really important at the time, at least to me as a reader. So, but lots of things changed in the 2000s. We saw lots of breakthroughs. Rainbow High was a book that came out, I think in 2000, I gotta check my notes. Yes, came out in 2001. It's a series that solely focuses on a group of friends and their sexuality in a coming of age story over 3 books in 2000.
The title sounds familiar. Was it ever adapted into something else?
I don't think they did a film. The film rights were sold multiple times, but I don't think it was ever actually made. Rainbow Boys, then Rainbow High, then Rainbow Road are those 3 books.
Rainbow Boys, Rainbow High, and Rainbow Road.
Yes, and they're all written by Alex Sanchez, who is a Mexican-American author. Really great series, and really appropriate for the age group that's intended. For the first time. That's what I guess we see in the 2000s, is the books are now properly geared towards their intended audience. We also have Boy Meets Boy by David Levithan. He will be a name that pops up a lot in LGBT fiction. Geography Club by Brent Hardinger. That was made into a film, I believe. Absolutely Positively Not is a book that centers on a 16-year-old homosexual boy who struggles with his feelings. Hero by Perry Moore is one of my all-time favorites. It's a fantasy novel about a teenage superhero. He must deal with his ex-superhero father's disgrace, his own sexuality, and a murderer stalking the world of heroes.
That sounds awesome.
It's an amazing book. It's really, really cool. And Perry Moore is a screenwriter. So when I say it's a cinematic book, I mean it plays in your head. So anybody who likes a cinematic story that's wanting to dip their toe in the homo pond, check out Hero by Perry Moore. It's a great book, and it's a quick read. It's YA, so it's shorter. Check it out. In Mike We Trust by P.E. Ryan is another one that I loved, and I loved it because of the moral ambiguity of the story. In the story, the main character loves his uncle, who is his dad's twin. His dad dies, and the uncle is a con artist and needs him to lie to get him out of some trouble. And so Mike, the main character, has to wrestle with whether he's going to do right by this uncle that he loves and looks up to and accepts him just the way he is, or does he do the right thing? And I don't know, it's a really great contemporary piece. Again, I read for the younger readers, so, for what it's worth, all YA stories, all really important. So that's kind of the 2000s, and it's a marked shift from what you saw in the 90s, where it's more niche. There is definitely a lot more contemporary fiction. Now, the other side that we're going to talk about is that M for M romance. This is what pops off in the 2000s. Some suburban ladies sitting around on their computers start writing up some homosexual romance fiction, borderline erotica, and I don't know who's buying it. No idea who they are, who keeps these people in business, but it's nearly smut. But in serious, the thing I would say is there is really good, just like everything else, there's really good and really bad. So sometimes you can tell when it's like a lady who has like a gay person in their life, or if it's like just a lady who like has a gay hairdresser, and so the story based on that, you can tell. But when I say hundreds and hundreds of books start coming out, that's that, and a huge ton of them start coming out in self-publishing.
And that's still in the 2000s.
The very end. Yes, it kind of starts in 2004. All of these that I have here were published in 2003 through 2004. So, and I have bins of, again, shame, but I have bins of these that were pretty much 2004 on, and almost all of them without fail are written by women, straight, white, cisgendered women, almost all. When anybody asks me, hey, who is a great romance writer for gay male fiction? I would point them to someone like A.L. Williams, who's a self-published author, transgender, writes great romance, sometimes paranormal romance. Might be mostly actually now. But anyway, great person for in the community writing that stuff. He's a great one. But for the vast majority of male-for-male romance you will find on any shelf anywhere is written by white, straight, cisgendered women. And they're buying a lot of it too. So Alex, A.L. Williams is a friend of mine. And so when I've asked, like, who are your fans? Like, she's like, it's always the suburban ladies who are like reading my smut in the back of the Suburban when their husbands are at soccer practice.
That's got to be a really interesting thing as an author to like do a book signing or something, especially early in your career, and start to see who your audience is. Like, I'm very curious who my audience is going to be. You know what I mean? I'm very interested in what the crowd is going to look like.
Totally. I think it's all about knowing your audience when you're writing it, right? Yeah. So I always say, know who you're aiming for, and then everybody else you get is a bonus.
Yeah.
That's cool. But what you're writing sounds very commercial. It sounds very wide. Like,
right.
I'm going to go to a wide net.
It's a big story. It's a big world. There's like 3 main point of view characters, and there's several other supporting point of view characters as well. So like it's a big cast, and it's a big world. So there should be a lot of places for me to go. I mean, that was kind of the idea, you know, and whenever you're writing one of these huge epics, is that there should be something in it for everyone, you know. If you're into this, you'll love these chapters. If you're into that, you know.
Well, and I think it goes back to what we were talking about, where you're just supposed to feel something. You know, if when you read something, I always try to remind people, no one cares how many words you write in a day or how fast your revisions took you. At the end of the day, were your characters believable? Was your world colorful and real? And did you make them feel something? Because if you accomplish those three things, you've accomplished your goal, in my opinion. So the 2000s, this era, is the shift. And when I say the shift, I mean we saw more than just white gay men, cisgendered gay men, as authors. We saw more authors of color. Alex Sanchez is one that stands out as being really popular throughout this time. And again, it was kind of great that it wasn't, again, I'm a white cisgendered gay male, so, but it was great that it wasn't someone that looked like me. I love that it was someone that didn't. And I want to see more of that, because when I hang out with my friends, my circle of friends, I'm the minority in that group. You know what I mean? And that's my normal. So
where are you, by the way? Where are you located?
St. Louis, Missouri.
Oh, right on.
Yeah, St. Louis. So we have a great, you know, LGBT community here. And it's really diverse. But like I said, and Ricky and I's circle of gays, circle of homos, as we call it, other than our elders, the youngins are all really diverse from different parts of not just the country, the world, you know. So that's what I like to read. So anyway, so that's the 2000s, seeing that shift. So before that, you saw the other thing that I just wanted to point out, this is also the time when we start seeing more female-led stories. So the one I'm going to throw out for people to read if they haven't is called Ash. One of my favorites. It's by Melinda Lowe. Came out in 2009. It's a YA novel, and it's a retelling, a really dark and fun retelling of Cinderella. And I just love what she did with it. Again, a minority writer. You'll see why when you read the story, why that's kind of important, some of the cultural things she pulls on. But Ash is a great book. So for anyone looking for the Lady Pond, that's my one in this time frame. There was a lot in the way of female for female romance stories. That was a very popular trend at this time as well. However, I feel like maybe more of those were written by more lesbian women because they read a little more realistic to me than some of the gay stuff does. Suburban white
cis women reading male romance holds up from my experience selling adult movies in the 2000s in Mississippi.
Listen, who doesn't like having extra sticks to play ball with? So that's the early 2000s, but what we're seeing more of is more representation by writers of color, and a little bit more on the lesbian front. I will get into more lesbian titles later, but there still aren't as many as there should be in this era. So
that's interesting to me. It feels a little odd that the rise was first in the gay male genre rather than the lesbian genre. For some reason, I would have thought it would be the other way around. Yeah.
It is interesting, isn't it? I wonder, obviously white cisgender gay cisgender white male. I'm not sure I'm the one to pontificate on that. I would say it probably has to do with what you and I imagine it would have to do with, which is just people that looked like me had more connections and access. And therefore our stories broke through. I also would imagine there's a good deal of misogyny. At least I know as I've watched the Own Voices hashtag for traditional publishing through the last 6 years, I've seen a lot of lesbian authors, creators, especially in the graphic novel space, talking about very misogynist views and just that's why I wanted to lift up and talk about Nubia, Real One. Because it's
great review, by the way. If anybody was watching, go check it out on his channel. Great review of Nubia.
Nubia, Real One is an awesome graphic novel. LGBT representation in some main characters in the Nubia's mothers. But, you know, there is 2 women of color who are the illustrator and the writer on that piece. And both of them have said things about the backlash they received just by taking over an IP property and making a new story with it.
Yeah.
So I wonder how much of that lack of lesbian representation just had to do with good old-fashioned misogyny.
It's funny, man, because like we had that the early days of Ultimate Spider-Man when Bendis switched over and started writing Miles Morales.
Yes.
And the backlash that he got.
Yes.
And then there was a time in the comics where, and we're seeing a representation of it on Disney Plus now, the storyline where Sam, the Falcon, takes over the role of Captain America. And just the wave of racists that just like crashed on those creators. It's baffling, man. It's crazy.
It's like you're showing your ass just for everybody. Like,
yeah,
you know,
like, dude, chill.
Totally. And what I want to tell somebody,
you don't like it, don't read it.
Totally.
Another, like the white Captain America is still right there.
He's still
pick that book up inside.
He's fine. Killed him. He's all right. He hasn't gone anywhere.
It's right next to it.
I know. It's mind-boggling, and it's so apparent what it's about that I think it's funny. And you know, to those people, I would say, you know, again, comic nerd, reading, all that good stuff. I can't say this so much about DC, but definitely Stan Lee with the Marvel Universe. The entire point of the X-Men universe was to talk about the civil rights movement through a different lens. That was the point. Like, the whole idea was to talk about things that people were born with that they could not change, that they were persecuted for.
And interestingly enough, I mean, all Bryan Singer horribleness aside, when he brought on the X-Men into the movies, he then took that civil rights theme and moved forward into the gay agenda as well, and related to the mutants as, you know, homosexual teens like coming out and figuring themselves out.
That was what X-Men was about to me. You know, although my mother would say she spent a car on comic books for me, and they were all Marvel. And that's why when I looked at it, I was an adult sitting in a college class about comics and LGBT representation before I made the connection with the professor saying, well, you know, the Marvel universe was all about the civil rights movement, and that's why it speaks to the LGBT community, because we were going through that time period later, like after the original civil rights movement, although I would argue some of that battle still being fought today. But anyway, it was like a light bulb went off in my head where I was like, oh yeah, that's why those stories connected with me at 12, 13.
Isn't that funny?
I say it's so important for kids to be able to pick up books that they see themselves in, because then they get lost in them. And for authors, it's really important for all authors to care about this, because at the end of the day, by the time our young readers, the kids that I want to move with my stories, by the time I pass them off to you in the adult arena, we want to have hooked them on reading. So the time to catch them in the stories that look like them, sound like them, feel like them is the age I'm capturing. By the time we hand them off to you, they're capable of imagining bigger worlds. And I'm not saying
such a beautiful way to look at it, man.
Well, I'm not saying that representation doesn't still matter. It does. But do you know what I mean by that? Like, if
absolutely
it's the bedrock of that reader and taught them that this is a way to escape your reality, then that will always be an escape for that reality. So I don't know. I think it's important for every author that we get passionate about niche markets for especially young readers, so that we create the readers you hope to engage as an adult author, right? So, you know.
The way you talk about it, you sound like, you know, a teacher who is, you know, talking about their kids graduating to the next grade or to, you know, the next school or whatnot. Like that's exactly what it is. I've never looked at it that way. This way of like ushering the generation through their categories of books.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's why I don't want to pigeonhole myself with just YA offerings, right? I think that's part of the reason I want to write even a little younger, because I want to write, I keep going back to Matilda and Roald Dahl and any of his stories, because I devoured them instantly upon figuring out who he was. The Witches, the BFG, the Magic Finger, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Charlie and the Glass Elevator. All of those stories shaped me as a reader. So I think the part of what makes that so critical to me to want to write to that age group is that was the first time I woke up to, wow, this is a way to escape how awful whatever is going on in my life is, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, this is a new subscriber. I just got an alert.
Hi.
That this gentleman just subscribed, and he brings up that the cis men are more overtly threatened by lesbians than gay men, surprisingly. Do you find that to be the case? I find that surprising.
Here, let me maybe say this and see if it makes sense. I definitely see it in publishing, and here's why. I think men as men.
He says he saw it constantly through the 90s.
Agreed.
2000s.
I agree with that. I think a lot of it has to do with us being visual creatures, right?
When
I think of men getting excited about lady on lady action, they want to see it. They're not trying to sit down and read it.
Gotcha.
Where for male, I think women are more visual through the page. At least that's been my experience with my friends who read erotica. That has been what I've noticed. Or romance, either or. That women are much more able to be turned on by the page than I think men sometimes have the attention span to do, right?
Makes sense.
I don't know. That's my theory.
It makes sense. There's always that comparison between men and women. Men are more visually stimulated. Women are more emotionally stimulated. And a good book just reaches in and grabs you by your emotions. So that makes perfect sense.
That's my guess. But I will say, I agree with that. I think there is very little lesbian content that is not exploitive in that time period. I mean, you almost get to the mid to tail end of the 2000s before you see any real breakthrough in the literature market. And when I think about the media market, it's very similar. So for folks who aren't gay, let me just give you a little breakdown. Ellen comes out in 97. 98, Will and Grace comes on TV. Ellen is immediately canceled and sent to obscurity for about 5 or 6 years. It's a theme.
I remember.
So she's in obscurity. She cannot come back. Will and Grace are out there doing their thing. But again, nothing overt or explicit. Queer as Folk was a show that came on in 2000 on Showtime. And it showed explicit gay sex from every one of the characters. Was an instant hit. Started in the UK, came over here, became a massive hit. The L Word would come on 4 years into Queer as Folk, and L Word became more popular than Queer as Folk and eclipsed it. And has since, I think, even been brought back to life in a new iteration now.
Has it?
Netflix or someone. I think so. I think it's happening now. I'll have to ask my lesbians. They will be on me for not knowing that already. But it's been a while since I could get out for brunch, people. But it's coming back, I think. But even there, for example, it was mostly white, gay men having all kinds of explicit fun on camera 5 or 6 years before anyone put a group centered around lesbian characters in that same spot. So, I don't know, for whatever reason, I think cis white gay men, for whatever reason, are breaking through first. I, of course, can tell you what I think the other reason is, but I don't have data to prove it. I can just say it appears to me to be steeped in privilege and access.
It does make sense. Yeah.
So, yeah. So that's that section.
All righty, going into the next
era.
2010s.
This is my favorite era because this is when stuff really starts getting fun. So now you're going to hear a lot of titles. I'm going to read you a series of titles. All of these happen to be YA. Again, that's my area. However, a lot of them were adapted to film and very successful films, so you'll recognize them.
Okay.
Number one was Simon versus the Homo sapiens Agenda, which was Love, Simon. which was a hugely popular contemporary story around a gay kid coming of age in his town and some love letters that he has with someone from his school. So, a super fun story, broke through and became very, very mainstream. The Drowning Girl was another one. It was not adapted, but it did become mainstream and break through on most of the bestseller lists. Being Emily, The Bone Palace, Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe. These are very YA titles. God bless YA. Boyfriends and Girlfriends, The Miseducation of Cameron Post, Hurricane Child, and Killing Eve. Killing Eve right now is a very popular show on, my husband and I watched it on BBC, but I know there's an American version of it. But Sandra Oh from Grey's Anatomy plays Eve. Or no, let's see. She doesn't play Eve. Can't remember the name of the character she plays, but she's in the show. So those are a series of books that center around gay characters that all but one were written by gay creators and content creators. And they all were also Lambda Literary Award winners or nominees. So all of these stories were hugely important. And what's great about them is it wasn't just white gay male characters, although there's plenty of those. We saw lesbian characters, we saw lesbians, women of color, all kinds of different stuff happening in that group that provides all kinds of coverage for kids, no matter who you are. And it really pops off in 2010, and you have a steady release of at least 3 to 4 titles, getting to as many as in 2019 as 25 titles that are traditionally published that are solely around a gay protagonist, not a periphery character or a friend character, but the story is about that character. So we also see our first transgender characters pop up in this time frame. So there's a book called George that I'd tell people to check out and read. It is written by Alex Gino, came out in 2015. It's the story of a transgender girl. She's a 4th grader who's struggling to be herself to the rest of the world, but the world sees Melissa as George, a boy. And so she uses her class play of Charlotte's Web to show her mom that she's a girl by switching roles with her best friends and playing the part of Charlotte. So that's a story. Now, it's written for much younger kids. That's written for a middle grade reader. But that kind of story, that's when that's necessary. Like,
that's a really great idea. A good way to like broach that topic with people. The idea of the kid doing it in their play, that's so cool, man. That's
it's an inclusive story. So, you know, that's
and then Charlotte's Web, such a
classic,
recognizable
classic,
you know, like classic. Yeah.
So how do you not connect with that? So what's wonderful is 2020, we saw more LGBT titles published than any year before it, and 2021 is slated to publish even more. So each year, traditional publishing at least is getting a lot better about what they're releasing and their inclusivity. Is it perfect? No. Do I wish it had much more representation across that own voices hashtag? Absolutely. But, you know, baby steps. I hope so. You know, I don't ever think it should be on par with every other story, right? We make up 10% plus or minus of the population. I just think that I'd love to see continued solid investment in LGBTQ stories to keep readers engaged in reading in general. If we can catch them when they're young, we'll have them the rest of their life.
Yeah, for sure. And like you said earlier, it's so important to cultivate, you know, good reading habits in our young generations. You know, I read my son a story before bed every night. And if I'm at work and I can't do it, my wife reads him a story every night. And he picks it. He picks the story. Sometimes it's one we've read before, and sometimes it isn't. And it's always like fun to see like what he's excited about reading. And halfway through the day, he'll usually be like, "Oh, Daddy, today we're gonna read Batman," or whatever it is. And just that he's excited, you know. And as he's learning to read himself, you know, and we're reading, I'm pointing out words and he's catching them and everything, you're just seeing like all the gears starting to turn.
Right.
It's beautiful, man.
It opens up a world of possibility. That is beyond fun to watch. The only job I've said I probably would have done really well and would have loved would have been a school librarian. I would have loved that job.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, so that's pretty much the time periods that we talked about and the eras. By 2010, we're catching up to what I like to say is like where we should have been all along. But we're still not at perfect, but we're definitely getting a lot closer. So the titles that are coming out now are, we've moved on from you're going to be hard pressed to find a contemporary fiction about a gay character that is just a coming out story, right?
Now we're telling other stories.
Right.
It just, the character happens to be.
That's right. And that's where we're headed eventually, is where I hope that writers are saying, you know, well, this character's gay with an intention. There's a reason for it. And then they just happen to be, you know.
It's interesting, especially, being a first-time author myself, I let people read my chapters. And what's funny is in my prologue, the prologue is essentially a short story. It's like 8,000 words. It's like a crazy long prologue. And the idea is that you're following the point of view characters, this girl named Bella, who is from this very segregated community on a farm that she's known her whole life. And there's a religion used to like hold her family in place. So she's sort of brainwashed and naive and doesn't really understand the wider world.
Yeah.
And they have a custom on this farm at age 18, very much like what you hear in some other religions. They'll have a pilgrimage period where for the year where you're 18, you leave the farm. You have no choice. You leave, you enter society proper, and you live there for a year, and then you choose whether to come back home or to stay out there. And whatever choice you make is final. And so we're with her on the night that she is made to leave her farm.
Wow. She
didn't want to. She is very much like under the control of this, this umbrella that they have over the family. And so you're in her head as she's experiencing this really crazy night, with characters that she would have never met otherwise.
Right.
And what's funny is I didn't have any idea of her sexuality when I wrote it. It wasn't in there for me. It wasn't part of the story. That's not what I was telling. And yet I'll let critique partners and beta readers read it. And more often than not, they were like, hey, Bella's super gay. And I was like, I understand where it came from, because there's a character, Faye, that she interacts with. She's one of my main characters in the rest of the novel. And she has a very, almost hypnotic, quality about her. She very much grabs people's attention and doesn't let go. And so that's what I was depicting in Bella. But everybody was like, yo, she is hot for this Faye chick. And not that I then went back and like leaned on it or anything, but now I'm aware of it. And so as I edit, it's something that's in the back of my mind that's like, you know what, they're right. Bella is like super gay. She doesn't know it, but she is.
Well, I think that's great. I think if your readers tell you something that, maybe you knew, but you didn't think you were telling them, that's even better, because, then it's definitely coming from a like, hey, she's got a touch of the homo in her.
Yeah.
And
so I think this brings us to what we can do better, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
All right.
So
I could have picked cheerier music.
I was thinking on the break, I was like, oh boy, we're still in the trauma period.
It's a downer. My apologies. I didn't realize.
But no, I mean, yeah. So what can we do better going forward? So you and I have talked about this. I don't know if we talked about it on camera, but bisexual, my number one thing that I would request of writers out there is we have got to write bisexual characters better. I don't see nearly enough books with stories about just bisexual characters, not bisexual now, gay curious later, but a truly bisexual character who explains that is a real thing, that it's not something imagined, And it doesn't, and I'm talking as much to my community, my gay authors, as I am straight folk, because for whatever reason, my gay friends who write stories about bisexual characters it's a problem. So we can't erase that being a real thing. And I feel like that happens a lot in stories. And I don't, and traditional publishing, you can sometimes blame that on editors. I see it as much in self-publishing as I do in traditional. So it's definitely a societal thing. So by erasure.
So what are we looking for in improving that? Like how do we go about being a little more respectful and accurate about the bisexual community versus a gay or lesbian character or story?
Well, I think the thing I'd love to see in any bisexual character is I think the thing that's missing is, and it's very simple and it doesn't take much, and this probably comes from the editor side of me working as a CP, but you can tell me a lot about a person's attraction for someone else in 2 or 3 sentences, very quickly. And I think as long as it's even, where the problem with, I think, bisexual characters, and I don't mean it has to be 50-50, but I mean, if they're going to mention that they're attracted to a male character in chapter 1, by chapter 5 or 6, we should have mentioned they're interested in female characters too, or else then they should just be a straight or gay character. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Make it so it's obvious to the reader. And that's one of those where anytime I'm editing it, I have a couple examples of I'm helping people write for Kent Sean's, and then I have a couple other friends I'm doing some contests helping them prepare for. And one of them recently was writing a bisexual character that my notes back were, this isn't working. Like this isn't working the way you think it's working. And I think you're going to turn off more readers than you turn on the way this character is written on the page right now. And essentially what was happening was the character was a female, bisexual, and the way it was reading was she's slutty, which again is also problematic in its own way. But it wasn't being written like she was genuinely attracted to other women. It was written like it was a convenience thing, and she's just kind of that girl. And I was like, ooh, that really doesn't land like I think you think.
This character's just game anytime.
Yeah,
kind of
right? And it happens with men too. I think bisexual characters are often written that way, where it's like, I call it the slutty thing, but that's the way they're written. Like, oh, well, if they're bisexual, obviously they're just kind of a hoe bag. And it's like, oh, no, I don't think so. So anyway, I would just say if they're bisexual, it should be obvious to the reader fairly early on that the attraction they have for one, they have for the other. And it doesn't matter what relationship they're in, doesn't matter any of that stuff. The attraction just has to be hit over the head with it as the reader. That's, everything else can be subtle, who they like, who they don't like, but you have to hit us over the head with the attraction being equal. The other thing with the by erasing bisexual people is we've got to quit the whole like bisexual people are murderers. Like it's really popular in thrillers.
Where did that come from?
I don't. Well, transgender too, right?
Yeah. Again,
the lambs. But again, that's another trope. These are tropes that we gotta like. They're done. They've had their time in the sun. But I think American Psycho is a great example of the murderous bisexual who just killed everything that he didn't nail down to sleep with, kind of deal. And that is harmful. Like I think it's done damage in my community with dealing with the way we talk about bisexual people. So those would be my top ones. Let's see. We've talked about the gay best friend. I need that trope to die, never come back, be gone forever. The way I explained it, when I was working with the kids at the youth center, we did a writing class with them, and we were talking about writing prompts, and one of them said to me, well, I'm going to write a story about being the gay best friend. And it was a young gay man who is now 26 years old. I can't believe it. But anyway, at the time, I said to him, I said, I don't know about you. I said, but I do not need to stand behind any female for my sparkle to be seen from space. So you tell your story, and that's enough to entertain people. And so that's what I'd say about the gay best friend thing. It needs to be over and done. You're not somebody's best friend. You are their, doctor, lawyer. Tell me a story. Tell me what makes you special that allow them into your orbit, right?
Yeah.
So
rather than this like
change.
walking decoration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, am I funny? Yes. More so when I'm nude, but I'm funny in general. It doesn't mean that's all I am, right? And I don't just serve the purpose of being your laugh line in your book. And if I do,
the comic relief,
there should be a purpose for it, right? Like make it worth something if you're going to do that. Because again, I think in today's day and age, it's tired. People will read it and think, nah, we've seen that before. So,
yeah.
You know, yes, I did just say I'm more funny when I'm nude, and I stand by that. Okay.
Glad you caught that. I was about to throw it on the screen.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. I switched to comments. I was like, is anyone talking? And then I realized I didn't have it on. Okay. So the other things I would say that I want to see end, because I'm not really giving you time to respond. Sorry.
No, go for it. You're doing great.
Everybody, before I forget. The transgender sex workers with a heart of gold story. I will be fine if I never pick up another transgender story that's about how they are a hooker with a heart of gold. Like, I'm good on that trope too. It is true that transgender women, especially transgender women of color, will often end up disproportionately in sex work. However, there are so many more stories that could be mined there for a transgender character than just what they are forced into by a society that will not accept them as they are. So, love to see that never happen. Transgender characters deceiving women to kill them. You know, I hate to speak her name, but before J.K. Rowling became Voldemort, her book, which came out before the Ichabod, as her adult title, was all about a male character that dresses up as women and kills them, and using it to deceive women and sneak into their homes and kill them. No, I'm good. You could watch Caitlyn Jenner's reality show and get 80 ideas for books just out of that whole first season of drama that would never end in somebody being buried.
Yeah.
And also, while we're on the transgender vein of what I'm canceling in literature, I want to also cancel the gender reveals as a plot twist. I don't even like to go to gender reveal parties. You people are causing wildfires. You think I want to pick up a book about a gender reveal? No.
We have 2 kids, and for neither one of them, we didn't do any gender reveal stuff. Like, it's so weird.
I know. It's like, what if they like gray? Like, I think Ricky and I have talked about it. He was like, if we were having kids, would we do a gender reveal? And I gave him the biggest side eye. Like really? No.
What's funny was like, this has happened to more than one of my friends actually, where they throw a gender reveal party, and whoever was supposed to either make the cake or whatever, they goofed up, they screwed it up. Like in one, they didn't even color the cake at all. So they're cutting into the cake and just getting yellow cake and have no idea.
Yeah, totally. You would come to my party and be sorely disappointed because you cut the cake and it would be like gray or green something, and I'd be like, there you go,
black.
That's right. We're not even having a baby. Surprise, we're having a dog. So gender reveal is a plot twist. You know, again, that's getting in that transgender territory. It's a trope that's really become harmful. So
it's so funny because this is showing me just how little I have read in this, because I don't know that trope. For example, gender reveal plot twists. I can't say that I can think of a single time that I've read that.
Oh yeah,
it's happened enough times that it's bugging you.
Yeah, well, and it's usually suspense and thriller, right? So because it's usually the twist at the end that the killer is actually a man dressed as a woman, right? Like that's usually how
you say that. I think I might
almost
think of a couple.
Never. I can think of only one time, and it's the only time I would say it was semi done well, where it's a female dressing as a man. But overall, I think it's usually used as a device in suspense, sometimes horror, maybe. Where there's got to be a twist at the end where you're shocked that the killer is actually her sister, dressed, that's not really her sister, it's a brother, and he's not transgender, he's just dressing up as a serial killer that dresses up, So, it's bothered me. JK, the Silence of the Lambs books,
And it's interesting because, you know, I've done more than one episode on this channel on serial killers. And, you know, you've got like Jeffrey Dahmer, for example,
Yep.
who had, you know, homosexual tendencies and experiences, but also used them for gathering his victims.
100%.
And catching them and preyed on them.
100%.
And, you know, that's a real dude that actually existed. But
Totally.
that's one dude. And from him, we've had so many fictional serial killers inspired from him and written to fit that mold. Yeah. And it's like, you don't like tell his story and then, you know, move on.
Well, I'll tell you the story. My husband and I have said someone really needs to write this, and I'm shocked it hasn't happened already. Maybe it has in self-publishing and I just missed it. But listen, Grindr and Scruff and all those gay male dating apps are very popular. The fact that that hasn't been an overused trope by now for a way to catch, speaking of someone wanting to kill somebody, we know people personally who have been robbed, accosted, all kinds of situations from hookups on those apps. There is a trove of stories just there that would never have to get into some of these tired tropes.
Yeah.
So yeah, every time I'm with my gay friends and I hear the Grindr ding, I'm thinking like, ooh, this could end up being a bestseller in a couple of years. Because what a great, I mean, my gosh, it's just you're luring people into a scenario where they've never been, somewhere that it's new, you know, just so many things. But yeah, that one I can let go of too. Another one that really bugs me is the closeted jock trope.
Yeah.
I don't know who in the world, in the LGBT world, was in love with the jock at their high school. I wasn't. They were stinky. They didn't really brush their hair. They didn't give a darn about what they were wearing. Most of the time wearing like basketball shorts and some high tops I would be caught dead in. And I was like, why are we in love with him? I was in love with that nerdy art kid and the band kid, like the kids that dressed legit and were kind of with it. I don't know what the deal is with closeted jocks, but I could do without that for the rest of my life too. Because it doesn't feel authentic to me.
Yeah.
So that one I'd pass on. I kind of said bisexual, but never acknowledged they're bisexual, which erases them. This is a popular one that I would love to see. And lesbians wanting more out of life than kids.
Yeah. It's like, yeah, that's like every lesbian story. Yeah.
Quite a few of the contemporary, revolve around the, will they keep their kids? Will they stay together with their kids? Will they break up and will get the kids? It's all around the kids. And I'm like, I know a lot of lesbians and zero of them have kids. Like, absolutely.
Yeah.
More about
dogs. They have a lot of dogs.
Dogs, plants galore. Kids, not so much.
That's so much.
You know. Okay, the depraved gay man. This is American Psycho, although that's bisexual, but still, the gay man is a killer. What was the Matt Damon movie? It was a movie, but I think it's based on a book where he plays the killer. Somebody in comments may remember it. It's like the 1990s. It's with Gwyneth Paltrow and anyway, he plays a serial killer that is in love with the guy and stalks them over like a 10-year period, I think, to be with the straight guy that doesn't.
I have to find this movie. I don't know what this movie is.
I'll think of it, of course, as soon as we get off, and I'll be like, oh yeah, that's it. Psycho lesbian as a plot, like the whole psycho lesbian thing. I can be good with that never happening again. Prison rape, or really any rape as a plot, I'd be okay to never see that one. Gay men all being promiscuous. I know tons that are prudes, so show me like the librarian gay guy in a story and they get really excited. And then everyone is straight, or if they're not designated as gay, that the reader is just going to assume that they're straight. So, you know, write it so that it's not giving me that. Okay, to be clear, you're not just a gay male killer who doesn't want us to think you're a killer, right? Oh. I don't know.
She's like, you're doing a lot of work to make us look away from gay killers.
I mean, did I see something about raisins and potato salad? Absolutely not. That's the only way you get to.
Raisins are unnecessary in pretty much anything you put them in. Unless it's an oatmeal cookie, like get out of here.
Oh yeah, I'm good with that. So yeah, so those are like the tropes and those are just personal. Obviously, they're not, to anybody but me. But I read a lot. Probably this year I'll read 100 books or more. So, and that's about average for me.
I wish I had time to read that much, man. My to-be read pile is ginormous.
I get it. And having kids, I can't even imagine. Like, you work, you got kiddos. It's like, I can't imagine.
Writing a novel.
That is a colossal task.
Yeah, so, it's a lot of work.
I get it.
My wife is probably out there right now like, yeah, it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
She's got the kids.
Right? How many books is yours? 4?
Sorry?
You're writing a series, right?
Three trilogy at least. We'll see if it grows beyond that. I already have ideas for like a short story anthology set in the same world.
Cool.
Like throughout its history and stuff.
What do you do? Like reader magnet? Like use it as a reader magnet?
Yeah, I was thinking that maybe when I finish the first draft of this first novel, and you're supposed to take some time away from it to dive into that, write some short stories, get the end under my belt a few times, and then maybe even put that out while the other one is still cooking,
Yeah. I mean, that's my plan. I have to get permission, but with the publisher, if I sell mine, to do that. But I have done the same thing. I've written a novella, and I have outlined 3 that are prequel stories to my universe that I want to give away on my website while doing pre-sale. So
see, if you were self-published,
the talented Mr. Ripley.
You wouldn't have to check with your publisher.
Thank you, Suey. The talented Mr. Ripley. Do you remember it?
Yep.
Yeah. That's the one. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Suey in on that because I was going insane. Like, what is that?
It's been so long since I've seen that I completely forgot about that movie.
Yeah. Well, again, there's the trope that.
Thank you, Suey.
Yeah, thank you, Suey. If gay men do not get what they want, we just go and kill everybody. So that's what we do. How's the
just Eva has a question for you.
Oh, Eva, way to call me out. I haven't started yet. So, in fact, what I have been doing before I got on this was my last revisions. So they're done.
What are you working on? What is it?
So this is my novel. This is my debut novel. It's a series. I've outlined 5 books. And then there are it's a universe, so similar to how Mercedes Lackey did it. And I wonder if this is because this is where I first read gay characters. But these 5 stories surround this main character. There are some stories plotted for the same audience age for this character's younger sister. There are 4 of those plotted. And then I've plotted 3 novellas that are previous generation, same world, that again, I hope to give away for free as a reader magnet. So awesome. This is going out to literary agents. I think April 1st, Eva, thank you for asking, will be when I go out and query. Tis time. It's
got to be pretty exciting to be that close.
Yeah, I wrote it in 2019. So I spent all of 2020 working on it myself with CPs. Then I hired an editor in August, have worked with her since August. And this is our last round together before I go out into the world on my own.
It's bananas.
So, yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I have a couple of agents that I have already talked to and have already seen this work, and I am resubmitting to. So I have 2 that I've already kind of talked to, and then I'm working 10 new ones besides those, and doing it in batches of 12. And I'm going to do it all on my channel so everyone will know every step of the arduous process, win or lose. So.
On that same topic, I wanted to remind everybody that I've booked a representative from Greenleaf Book Group to be on Livestream Sunday, but it's not going to be on a Sunday. It'll be like a special Tuesday right? episode. Yeah, it's Tuesday, April 13th, 4 p.m. It'll just be an hour long because apparently she's pretty strapped for time. But she'll be coming on to answer all these kind of questions. And they're a hybrid publisher. So instead of the traditional publishing model or the self-published model, you have them in the middle where their pitch is that the writer maintains creative control, maintains creative rights and everything. and then they help with all the publishing stuff. They'll get you your editors, they'll get you into stores. So she's going to be on to talk all about that, give us as much information as possible. I hope that you're in the chat to ask some questions as well. And that should be a really good one, especially if you are at all nervous about being a self-published author like myself. There's so much work, there's so much to do, but I also am not ready to dive into traditional publishing either, you know. So like, I'm very interested in what she's going to bring to the table. Should be cool.
I would tell anybody, you know, who's thinking about it, definitely watch his live stream. That's 100% where it's at to get all the information you can. My advice from my friends who have been traditionally published, you're friends with someone who's been traditionally published, so Nina had feels about this too. But what I see my friends doing is exactly what Nina did, where she got a deal on her YA work. Then now Nina, someone approached her to do a different story. However, most of my friends write middle grade at the same time, and they've gone out and sold that as a separate deal, because usually that's the only way you can get around the first look option. It's usually by category. So yeah, I would tell anybody, if you're trying traditional publishing, you're thinking, I can't make it on the advance on one book a year, then the way to get around that and do 2 a year or more is to write down a category, up a category. Adult, new adult, middle grade, go outside of whatever you normally have contracted in.
Makes sense.
So anyway, but I'm with anybody who's afraid of self. I'm not talented enough to self. So.
And I don't know if it even comes down to talent. It's just so much work. Because
I
mean,
talent. I don't mean,
and expensive.
Yes.
You know, just the professional edit alone is a very expensive part of the process
for mine.
And required. You can't skip that.
Nope.
Like.
Yep, 100%. And the stuff I notice now that I learned from this process that I didn't know before is incredible. You know, Sui, I'm editing something with her. I'm working with her on something now, and she would tell you that a lot of the dialogue stuff I've like beaten her over the head with is stuff that I learned because I've done 300 pages, 4 rounds of this over 8 months. So,
yeah, it's in there. It's rattling around in there.
Yeah. So yeah. So does anybody have any questions about the gay representation thing? I would tell people, use it if you need it. Don't if you don't. Goes back to what Adrian said at the beginning. Write the world. Write what you know.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, you hear that a lot. Write what you know. And I think most people take that to mean write what you know yourself. And yet I take it to mean write what you know of the world.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, well, you're surrounded by, write about that. I mean, I'm finally writing the short story for Kent's contest. I have like a couple days before it's due.
Yeah, you were like really last minute.
And it's not that I left it for last minute. I just could not nail down an idea. And even the one that I ended up with, which is an idea that I had a long time ago, I didn't have like whatever spark it needed to become a real story. And it was only in the last 2 nights that I was like, oh yeah. So now I'm writing it, and it's like, I forget what I was going with this. What were we talking about?
Well, I was going to say collaborate on that. Because I'll say Sui sent me a story that, you know, she said, I'm not sure I'm going to put it in, but I was like, put it in. And then the old 2 heads are better than 1. Sometimes the ideas that, you know, I throw in track changes and I'm like, hey, consider this, you know, use your wording, make it your own. But what about this idea or that? It just elevates it. So,
dude, I'm right there with you. I had a buddy, Steve. He moved away, so he doesn't live here anymore. But early in 2020, he and I were hanging out a lot. I mean, we weren't working very much, and we're both trying to be writers, so we were hanging out a lot and bouncing ideas back and forth. And I was stuck on something for this book, my work in progress, and I was stuck on this one thing. And I pitched him the scene. I told him what I was stuck on, and he goes, "Oh, why don't you just do this?" And it was just this explosion of, oh my God, not only is that perfect, but it's going to be the best thing about this book now. It's like I'm closing with it's the epilogue.
There you
because
go.
it's like this is what's going to bring everybody back for the sequel. So it's bounce ideas around. Do it.
How do you end your first story? Do you end your first story with a cliffhanger, or or is it totally standalone?
I am a huge believer in prologues and epilogues for this very question, because if you're writing a series, your book needs to be able to stand on its own as a book by itself. It has to have an ending, but if it's part of a series, you also have to set something up for what's coming up next. And so that's where my epilogue comes in. If you were to not read the prologue and not read the epilogue, that book still stands by itself as a book from chapter 1 to the end.
Gotcha.
Once you add in the prologue, it sets up the whole series. And once you put in the epilogue, it sets up the following book.
Cool. I can't wait to read it.
I hope you do. I don't know if I sent you the chapters already. I forget.
No. I want to read
send you the chapters.
I will. I gotta sign up for your newsletter anyway, so I'll do that, and you'll have my info. Yeah.
Awesome. Let me see what's going on in the chat. See if we have any questions.
Like I really enjoyed writing with Sui. That's 100%.
Sorry, what was that?
I'm reading Sui's comment about like a freaking lightning bolt. I've enjoyed working on her story for Kent's thing, and I've been helping Bex, the novel Nana. She had a story that she approached me with, and I've done a few rounds with her.
Nice.
And again, both stories, it's interesting. They have very similar trauma, but very different stories. But interestingly, almost mirror image traumas. So
weird.
Yeah.
It's lightning bolt related?
No,
okay, I was confused by
the ideas. So like she'll send me something and I'll send something back. And I think we're on like our 5th round of edits on hers. So anyway, but like she'll send me something. I'm like, oh my gosh, I love that. And I'll be like, what about this? And then send it back. And then I'll get a note back like, that's a great idea. Just needed to use British words. And I'm like, oh, okay. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I'm not doing Kent's thing because I was knee deep in my own work, and I set my deadline for April 1st. I was going to get out and query. So
yeah, I set my first draft deadline for March 31st.
You're still you're still doing the contest though.
Yeah, I missed it last year, and I didn't want to miss it again. Win or not, I gotta throw my head in there.
Yeah, cool. Good luck. May the odds be ever in your favor.
Thank you, sir. What were we going to so for the final section you have what authors writing LGBTQ should know going forward. Let's throw that up here. Never again with that music, man. Never again. Lesson learned.
So great. The only thing I really had here for notes was I was just going to do a quick little definitions moment where we clarified. So like transgender is denoting or relating to a person whose sense of personal identity and gender does not correspond with their birth sex. Non-binary is a spot that's popular right now where there needs to be more stories for non-binary characters, but sometimes folks go, well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
So that's denoting or relating to a gender or sexual identity that is not defined in terms of traditional binary opposition, such as male and female or homosexual and heterosexual.
Right.
So for me, I can tell you non-binary would be very hard for me to write at this time. I don't know if I'm there as a writer to know how to write that well right now. So
I think I would point people to 2 different sources. One would be, ironically, John Wick, chapter 3, has a non-binary character in it. They never, say it. They never use the term. Yeah. But you look at the character, and it's as non-binary as you can get. It's like they nailed it, in my opinion. And the other one is going back to Neil Gaiman and the Sandman. Yeah. One of the Endless is Desire. and desire is non-binary.
Cool. Okay. So that I would say is important. You know, queer is more
Vague.
Yeah, and not something that I think so much straight authors are going to venture too far into.
I've always interpreted, in my own naivete maybe, that the word queer, and especially the Q in LGBTQ, which is why I don't usually go past that with the letters, because you have gay represented, you have lesbian represented, bisexual represented, transsexual represented, and then the Q for everyone else.
Question.
If you still feel that you fit in this community in some respect, that's what queer is for. That's what the Q is there for. And again, that's just my own interpretation. But that's why I feel like it seems to be a little more vague, at least in descriptive terms.
Well, and I think the thing that I would tell people is look at that term as whether or not it's appropriate.
Right.
So, for example, it's a pejorative term that was used against gay people that is sort of something they've taken back. Similar to a term that I hate, that was a book title we talked about earlier, but fag hag. Hate that term. But used within the gay community, it's a term of endearment, you know?
Yeah.
And so it works when a gay author does it. It sometimes doesn't land when a straight author does. I think queer could be similar. I look at it the same way I look at the N-word, for example.
I was just going to say that. Yeah.
Or any other racially charged pejorative.
Yeah. And the way that the Black community took the word back.
Right. That's
and
right.
It's theirs now.
That's right.
That's exactly the same.
Queer is the same. It is a lot the same. And I know a lot of kids use it more. And, you know, I think that's great. Thank you, Sue. You the best. My partner. So yeah, I would say those are the things to be careful of. I would say always look for sensitivity readers. There are free sensitivity readers all around you if your thing is money. If you're self-publishing and you're like, oh, I can't afford that, or, you know, err on the side of there is some gay person or lesbian person around you that will read it for free. You just have to ask. And if you don't, if there's literally no one in your life that you know firsthand that you could say, hey, would you read this for me and give me your feedback as a gay person or lesbian person? Maybe you need to have like a sit and think about why there's nobody in your life that fits that bill. And I understand if you're living in like South Dakota, but like if you're living in St. Louis, Missouri or Miami, or you know what I mean? Like what's going on? Like, meet your neighbors. It's okay. We won't bite. We'll show you how to do your lawn better. I'm just saying. So what do you do? But I think that's what I would say is lean into the people you know that can read and kind of check your work.
Yeah.
Give you feedback, and then be willing to listen. I mean, this is the same thing I say to anybody I edit.
That's the big one.
You got to be willing to listen. I mean, if I'm going to send you edits and you're going to argue with me about it.
Yeah.
I've
always been really good about that. I pride myself on that. Where anybody gives me any feedback, my Libra brain is like, well, let me look at both sides of this, not just my own, but theirs as well. And so whether it's a good note, a bad note, whether I agree, disagree, whatever, I'm just thanking people for their note. Thank you so much for that note.
Me too.
You know, noted. Moving forward, you know, like that's the way to go, man.
Me too. I'm going to do a whole video on, I've already done kind of a preview of how to be a good CP, but having done it now a few times for people, I'm definitely going to be doing so. And to be looking for me, something that's going to be coming soon, some videos on proper dialogue formatting.
Oh, nice.
And basic like manuscript formatting, because those are all the things I learned through this process. Yeah. Now when I'm editing people, all for Kent's story thing, by the way, I'm catching like, ooh, this is incorrect. Ooh,
Did you format it yourself?
Well, okay. So you're thinking formatting for like publishing. I mean, just proper, like, you know, as if you
literary
were into a traditional, to a publisher for them to publish it. I'm not going to teach them how to self-publish formatting. I mean, more like just format it for publication, period. And best practices on that kind of. So those will be the things coming from me in the future.
Nice. The links to Barrett Laurie's channel, Instagram, website, all in the description below.
Yeah.
Make sure you guys go over there,
And
subscribe.
I mean, if you have some books that I didn't mention that you're like, hey, you should have read this, please hop up in my mentions on Twitter or Instagram and
Throw it in the comments here too.
I will 100% read the book, and I'm looking for new titles all the time. So give me all the info.
A lot of YouTubers, especially author tubers, I'm finding, don't know that they have a YouTube URL.
Yeah, I know. Me too. I don't think Prince changed his yet. And I'm like,
no. Well, but he doesn't have to. It works. Like if you just type in his username as like it just works.
Right.
But he still has like that long
thing. I know. Because when he came on mine, I was trying to like save it and put it in. I was just like, oh man, that's.
I was counting the days till I hit 100 because I knew as soon as I hit 100 subscribers, I'm like, I get my address. Come on, let's do this.
Me too. That was like a rite of passage. I was like, I'm there.
And it makes it so easy, especially on like Instagram where you can't share links and stuff.
Yes.
Like people see that and they're like, okay, I can go straight. Like they can type it out.
Yep.
You know?
One thing I love that you did, that I did too, I was advised by a literary agent to do it, was make all of them the same.
Yeah.
All of them.
Or as close as possible if it's not available.
Absolutely, because it just makes your life so much easier.
Every time I see my Instagram username with the underscores in it, it irks me so bad. I hate it because it's like the one that sticks out.
I underscored all mine because I had to. So Twitter's an underscore, Instagram's an underscore. My YouTube is the one that couldn't. So the only one that isn't. And then Facebook I just got on, but boy, I'm hating every second of it. So.
Yeah, I can't. I hear so much about how lucrative, especially Facebook groups are. I can't.
Is it working for you? Like I can't figure out what I'm doing wrong. I'm like, I'm not connecting with anybody.
In fairness, I honestly haven't really tried as hard as I probably should have. I don't have a Facebook group. I have a Facebook page for Books by Adrian, and everything that I post everywhere else gets automatically, posted on there. But like to have another platform to run and like have enough already.
Too, right? You've got a Patreon, you've got a Discord.
Yeah, I have YouTube, I have Instagram, I have the website itself. And when I first launched all this stuff, I also had Twitter and Tumblr and all. I got rid of all that shit. And then the podcast, I did one episode and then I couldn't keep up with YouTube and the podcast. Now that I have content built up on YouTube, I'm going to be able to rip the audio off and turn them into podcasts. But to like add another show to my schedule to do podcasts, like I don't have time to do that.
Let me just say, watching your live stream Sundays, mad props. I am planning to do about 2 interviews a month. I don't know how you do it. Like
honestly, it's easy because of the guests. You guys just kill it. You come on here and you run with it. And that's why I get you guys. I get people who know what they're talking about, who are not only knowledgeable, but charismatic, have, intriguing personalities and points of views. And I just let you guys go. Like Nina was answering questions like this, like they were coming at her and she was just throwing them out. Kent Sean, like I keep saying I let him off the leash. I really did. I just like, hey, Kent Sean. I watched the video.
Yeah, it was great.
It's easy. It's easy to just, when you have people who know what they're talking about, it's easy.
I don't know. I guess I'm in the thing where I'm interviewing like mostly writers about their stuff. So I'm like reading their books too.
Yeah, you have to read it. You're taking your notes. You have your questions about it. Like it's a much more contained interview. Yeah. So this is more of a discussion here.
I'm watching yours like, I don't know how he does that many. I'll never be able to book that many. It's just free of a booking team somewhere in the house.
It's just me sending messages on Instagram. I reached out to Greenleaf on Instagram.
Like, I love that. That's, by the way, I can't wait for that one. That's going to be very interesting.
I'm very proud of these live stream Sundays. I mean, they're turning out even better than I thought that they would, especially once I moved and now I have like my own little space. I can close my door. I can record whenever. This is much, much better.
I will say, I love occasionally seeing a kid like run behind you. Like in the old place. Like you'd
Yeah.
be there working, and like there'd randomly be a kid running behind you. And then
I just remember one
movie,
where
and
my wife was walking past, and she just like
pause. It kept going. Ricky's done that on mine before, where he's walked in and been like, and I'm just like, now see, you look silly. Okay, Gloria is telling you she didn't get the Discord link to work. I don't know what that means.
Couldn't get the Discord link to work. My Discord link isn't working.
So.
Okay, I will look into that.
Yeah,
or maybe he
has to approve. I don't know. Maybe like once you get there, he has to let you in.
I believe I have it set where you don't need to be invited, where you can just sign up. But if I'm wrong, I'm happy to send you an invite. Leave it in the leave your email in the comments, and I'll send you an invite for anybody watching this, and for Glory Writes the Blues, which is an awesome username, by the way.
Handle. That is such a great handle. I'm going to follow that account just because.
Glory Writes the Blues. I like it.
Yeah.
Mr. Barrett Laurie, any closing thoughts?
This has been a blast. I love your channel. This is a lot of fun. I love
yours too. I wanted to mention that your reviews in particular are very well done.
I have fun. I have a lot of fun. I am ready to review your book and then have you on to talk about it. So I'm going to be in December. I'm going to start bugging you. Although
I'll send you my sample chapters.
Yeah, I'm going to get you my info so you can do that.
I have the prologue through chapter 5 that I'm comfortable showing people.
Cool.
And you're welcome to read as many or few of those chapters as you like. And I consider it the first act of the book. It sets everything up for it. Like by the time you get to chapter 5, you're like, oh, this is the kind of story I'm reading. Okay. You know.
All right. Cool.
Okay, so they were talking about me and Mike. All right. Thank you. I'm going to fix that, and I'm going to get you an invite.
Yes. Everybody out there that came, thank you so much. I was thrilled to have people show up to hear me blather on about the books I love. My husband was just following me around while I was just taking many, many books off of our bookshelves and just loading him up.
Yeah, you were just like you had books coming out of everywhere.
Ready. And he was like, you're having way too much fun with this. And I was like, this is like charting the path of my life. The only thing I was going to say that I didn't, which is quick at the end.
Bring it.
All of these titles are brand new and came out in 2020 or 2021. And each of them have gay representation in all of them. So, you know, what I love is that kids, doesn't matter where you're from, what you look like, you might pick up a book that's going to have a story that connects with an LGBT reader. So I love that. That gives me hope for the future.
Same.
Representation is a good thing, so let's keep it happening.
Word. Well said.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for being here, Barrett. This was great.
Thank you for having me.
This was beautiful, man. And perfect. 2 hours on the dot.
Boom.
Sir, a surgeon couldn't have done it better. Well done. Stick around. We'll gab a little bit afterwards. Perfect. Everybody, leave a like, comment, subscribe. Go check out Mr. Barrett Laurie, his channel, his website, all the information below. And we'll see you next week with our guest, Adrian Guadalupe, who will be talking to us about marketing. And not just book marketing, just marketing. Because we're going to just download information off of him and apply it to being self-published authors who have to market their own book. And by the way, traditionally published authors also have to market their own books. Yeah, so show up for that one, everybody. Come with your questions ready and be there live, because as I like to say, even if you have questions you know you want to ask, there are also questions you have no idea yet that you want to ask. He'll be talking about something. He'll say something that's going to trigger your mind and go, oh, I wanted to ask about this. So please show up live and check that out. Barrett Laurie.
Thank you.
The great and powerful. We're out.
Whew.